Our gospel reading today is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13, verse 31 through 35. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox from me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you. And I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" May we hear and understand what the scriptures are teaching us today. So on this second Sunday of Lent, our reading pits that fox, that's Herod, against a hen wanting to protect her chicks. Several years ago, I gave a sermon about the hen and the chicks, and it seems we're back there again. This particular story is a favorite story of gospel feminist scholars. It's often preached at ordinations of clergywomen. The rendering of Jesus as a mother hen is astounding. And it opens our imagination to a lot of tender images that the church has often ignored. Tender. Beautiful word. And it's especially beautiful now as we're surrounded by things like coarseness and evil and hatred and vileness. This story from Luke seems more important than ever. We're living in a time when American politics is being shaped by a vision of this warrior Jesus, also being shaped by swords of division. But Mother Hen Jesus, that doesn't seem to be in the picture. Makes me wonder if people are forgetting about that. Well, Lent is a time of a lot of contrasts, a lot of either-ors, a lot of choices that we make. We choose a way of life and compassion or a way of death and hatred. Unlike other church seasons, some that are kind of poetic and ambiguous, there's really nothing very neutral about Lent. Today's story from Luke offers us a choice. Are you going to surrender to the fox, to Herod, the strong man? Or are you willing to be embraced and vulnerable by Jesus, the mother hen? That's it. That's the whole story. Last week, Jesus himself was offered a similar choice. The devil showed him all the kingdoms of earth, promising that he would have all of them in the palm of his hand if he would just worship the devil. And Jesus said, "No. No way. It is written, you shall worship God only and serve only God." God is God. I learned that today from Michael. Michael told me God is God this morning. Thank you, Michael. Jesus was not willing to give in to a satanic temptation to become some sort of ancient world strongman. He was not willing to be a sort of Jewish Caesar in lieu of the Roman one. That wasn't his calling. Jesus embraced humility and humanity and compassion and chose God instead. So today, second Sunday in Lent, the temptation shows up again. This week, the Roman imperialism joins us in the form of King Herod, the Roman client king of Galilee. This isn't Herod the Great, the one who was there when Jesus was born, the one who murdered the innocents. This is his son. His son's name is Herod Antipas. He was one of the three kings who reigned, not the three kings of the Magi, But the three kings, they're called a tetrarchy, if you're a Bible scholar or geek, tetrarchy. Anyway, they reigned after the kingdom of Herod the Great, and the kingdom was split into thirds. And Herod Antipas was one of those. He got the northern third of Great Herod's kingdom. So he was a lot diminished compared to Herod the Great as a Roman collaborator. But he was still in charge. He lived up to his family reputation, that of being ruthless and violent. He was one of the major villains of the New Testament. He was the one who put John the Baptist and eventually Jesus to death. Just so you know who we're dealing with. In this episode, Jesus is journeying southward to Galilee with some Pharisees. And the Pharisees come up and warn him. Yeah, they're good guys in this passage. That's kind of nice. They come to warn him and they say, Herod's wanting to kill you. You better get a move on, get somewhere safe. And the thing is, that is effectively another temptation. It's not of the devil. It's one of co-workers and friends. And how many times do our friends say, oh, let's just do this. No one will know. Who's going to know? How are they going to know? Just let's go do this. No. Jesus, King Herod's after you. Stop healing these people. Go hang out in a cave for a while. Go into hiding. Wait till his temper cools off. Then you can come back up. They were probably worried that the same fate would befall Jesus that had happened to John the Baptist. Imprisonment and execution. They were protecting him. Maybe Jesus was a little worried too. How could he not be? He's here in human form. Maybe he had a momentary flash though. Don't run. Fight back. But he said no. He didn't give in to the temptation of his friends. He said, go tell that fox, that sly, destructive one, I'm not running. I'm going to keep on working. I'm going to keep on healing. I'm going to keep on taking care of people. I'm going to keep liberating the ones who are ensnared by evil, and I'm going to keep healing the sick. He was saying his work wasn't done, and he's going to keep doing it. To be afraid of Herod was the same as worshiping him. Believing Herod's power to be greater than God's. So no matter what Herod's threats were, no matter how imperial authorities raged against him, he would continue on with God's work until later, when he would eventually face down his accusers in Jerusalem. No matter the threats, carrying on God's work. Of course we can learn from that. At the thought of the city he clearly loved, Jesus pauses and says this lament, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. That's a key part of that sentence. You were not willing to be gathered under my wings. That's the contrast between King Herod, imperial strongman, and Jesus, the prophet who understands himself to be a mother hen to her chicks. Strongman versus mother hen. Violence versus vulnerability. Empire versus empathy. Giving in to fear for your own safety or surrendering to the safety of God's sheltering wing. Run away or continue in the difficult work of love. The contrast involves a choice. Which are you willing to follow? Was Jerusalem willing to be embraced? Many of the leaders in Jerusalem were so afraid of Rome and whoever was in imperial authority that they were following the strongman. The question goes on all through time. Are you willing to be embraced by a vulnerable Jesus, by a prophet who knows he might die at the hands of Herod? Shortly before his own death, Washington Post columnist Michael Gerson wrote, "The prophets and Jewish people waited for centuries in defiant expectation for the Messiah to deliver Israel from exile and enemies. But the long-expected event arrived in an entirely unexpected form. not as the triumph of politics and power, but in shocking humility and vulnerability. Are you willing to surrender to vulnerability? Doing that doesn't mean that you stand by and fail to protest. It doesn't mean that you do not help other people. All of these things still happen, but while we do them, we are vulnerable. Throughout history, Christians have often traded vulnerability for power. The Crusades was an example of that. They haven't believed in their own lamenting Jesus, preferring instead to opt to establish worldly empires. Right now, a lot of Christians in my own country are not willing to be embraced by a vulnerable God. In fact, they're so terrified of vulnerability, so fearful of being embraced by God, so terrified of following a way of compassion and love, that they have created a Jesus in the image of Herod, making him an icon of the very Caesar that Jesus rejected in the wilderness of his own temptation. There's this new imperial Jesus, the Jesus of MAGA. Donna, will you move my slide to the next one? That's an illustration by Will Novostelik out of Midjourney, the one on the left. I had to put a hand beside it. Anyway, Christian nationalism, the religion supporting this dictatorial, imperialistic arm, is espoused by those who clearly are not willing to give themselves to vulnerable profit, and those who think that glorifying this type of violent, intolerant Jesus is the answer. They think that that is standing up for right. It is not. It is standing up for hate. The only thing that can defeat that, of course, is love. But they don't want a loving shelter. They want vengeance. Christian nationalism is built on a theory of hyper-masculine, patriarchal warrior Jesus and an explicit rejection of anything that they believe feminizes God. They insist on a muscular faith to defeat their enemies. A little side note for those who are, I was going to say this for the end, but I'm going to bring it in now. A little aside for Bible and Greek geeks. The word for fox in the Luke text and the word for mother hen, for those who love language and the fact that there are genders in language of words, both of those words are feminine. Even the Herod word. So, I don't know, sort of LOL to the muscular, hateful Jesus crowd. The whole text is cast in a rather provocative way into this gender-bending story of a female fox and a mothering hen. And it might be that Herod, representing empire, is depicted more as cunning or slyly destructive, rather than masculine strength. It sort of throws a little further fly in that ointment of imperial Christianity. Luke could have been elevating the idea of the mother hen over the sly fox, of course. But in that way, he shows the superiority of vulnerability, nonviolence, and love over lying and destruction. The supporting of a modern-day Caesar in a political seat of power is idolatry and heresy. MAGA, with its I won't use this word, you won't understand it. MAGA with its flawed theology and, what should I call it? Theo bros, right? Theology brothers. And tech utopians, they ridicule vulnerability as feminine. They claim to protect women by casting them aside. They cast empathy as a sin and compassion as a weakness. All of it, this striving for supposed masculinity without vulnerability is a delusion. It's a rejection of the very nature of human fragility. And that's the thing that we frail beings share. And all these notions of masculine imperialism, MAGA Christianity, were rejected by Jesus himself. Jesus explicitly spurned the temptation of imperialism, whether it came from the devil or from his own friends, because at the core, imperialism is a deception. The promise of a politics of strength, superiority, and control that is at odds with humanity itself, because everyone is vulnerable. In the face of Herod's threats, Jesus chose instead to do brave, courageous, humane, compassionate work to liberate the enslaved and to heal the sick, to be with others instead of withdrawing in fear. He insisted that God's commonwealth is not going to arrive by surrendering to Roman Empire, but would come instead with the wing of a sacred embrace. God is not Pilate, God is not Herod, God is not Caesar of any time or place. Those are agents of the devil. But God, the true God, is Israel. God is Jesus. God is light. God is love. And that love was willing to suffer with us and for us. The mother hen who refused to fear the fox. The one who refused to run away. I have seen videos of hens defending their chicks successfully. They are fierce. That's the Lenten story today. Another temptation, another choice. Herod or hen? Unholy arms or sheltering wing? Jesus willingly surrendered to vulnerability. I'm wondering whether you will. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote, "Greatness, even for God, certainly for us, is not to be above people, but to be with them, hearing their silent cry, sharing their distress, bringing comfort to the distressed and dignity to the deprived." The message of the Hebrew Bible is that civilizations survive not by strength, but how they respond to the weak. Not by wealth, but how they care for the poor. Not by power, but by their concern for the powerless. What renders a culture invulnerable is the compassion that it shows to the vulnerable. I think Rabbi Sacks had a lot to say there in a good way. So that's our question. Which are we choosing? Unholy arms or sheltering wing? Amen.